So, the things we've covered so far, most of you missed this one, although Robbie was here for it and my daughter. So this is talking about, I'm just going to review it really quickly, and I don't know if I actually sent it to you. I sent it to you on an email, but I don't think I printed it for you. But this is, wow, chaos. Is chaos. Is that it? No. I had it right the first time. C-H-A-O-S. So we have the chaos of life, and the result of the chaos is that we feel fear and other negative emotions. And so what we want to do is we want to control it. And so what we are talking about is how to get off this cycle of there's danger and things are difficult and then our feelings about it and then wanting to control it. The only way we can get off of that is going a different direction, which is called, surrender. And you surrender in, I'm going to mess this part up. It doesn't really matter. You surrender in faith because you experience love. I think it's actually different words, but this is how I understand it. You believe that there's enough for you to get through it, and you surrender. And it's interesting because I was talking with my therapist about this idea this week, and we were like, it's interesting. In psychology, you call this acceptance. But it's this idea that you're like, I let it go. I can't hold it anymore. So acceptance. It's this idea that you can't just keep holding on to whatever it is that you can't control. So when it comes to, this is the path of freedom, is surrendering to God. But when it comes to world religions, you have this different dynamic where you have, it's kind of for the same reason. There's this chaos in life and this fear that ensues from it that you can't control. And so people are we're well, we need some solution. We need some pathway to resolution, or God. So that, a lot of times people will be like, okay, well, it's all these different, things. So let's say I have all my religions, we got Hinduism, we got Christianity, we got, tribal religions, we got just things that aren't even technically a religion, but a worldview, like communism, or we have, humanism. What'd you say?
Consumerism.
Yeah, which, consumerism, which is, that goes with humanism. Consumerism. Gosh, there's lots of isms. Buddhism, Islam. Okay. So, anyways, we have all these Islam. Okay,
Judaism.
Okay, yeah. So they're there. Let's just say I wrote them all down. I did. Okay. So we have these things, and lots of times people are like, okay, all these things lead to the same place. They lead to God. And we talked about that. What is a few weeks ago is when we were talking about world religions, what is their end point? Their end point is, something that is considered good to us. Some resolution, which a lot of people are like, okay, well, it's God, it's heaven, it's a peaceful afterlife, it's, a peaceful death, or it's, in religions, it's usually, in humanism and communism, it might not be there might not be an afterlife, but in a lot of them, you have reincarnation, so you keep going and keep going until you get to nirvana, in which case that's their peaceful resolution. You become one with the universe. So there's these paths that everybody's like, this is the way we work to control the chaos to bring us to good, or, to what, Christians call goodness is being connected with God, or the term that is used in the Bible, which was also previously the Torah, is shalom, which is a Jewish term, which means peace. It also means hello or goodbye, but ultimately it means peace. But it's not just yay, peace. Peace. This type of peace is profound. It's pure. It's pure goodness. It's pure. It's the absent. It's justice lived out entirely. which is why a lot of people who are into justice work use the word shalom, because it essentially means like the all-encompassing justice, when things are as right as they could be, when humans are right with God, when humans are right with each other, when things are the way that they were meant to be, which assumes that there's a way that they were meant to be, a way meant to be, like the good way. And so like there's this desire that's in a lot of us, in a lot of religions, and a lot of worldviews that says we have to have some way to manage and control this chaos and this fear, and we have to find some pathway. And so we have all these pathways, and a lot of people say, okay, all these pathways, they're all the same. Like ultimately, they lead to good and God. In Christianity, we believe that they might lead to something that could be a little bit better, but they're not going to actually, lead entirely to God, because only grace and his forgiveness and his enoughness leads us to God. So it's like the matter of like, the reason there's like this mountain picture is that it's like, do they all lead us to goodness or to God, or do they, or is it that these were all pathways that we, because some people are like, well, they all lead to the same thing. And then some of them are, and then what we believe is that they don't all lead to the same thing. They all try to lead to the same thing, but they don't actually get there. Because none of them, and this is what we talked about the week that you weren't here, is that none of them really have this element of forgiveness or grace or resolution that covers our sin and our sorrow and our mistakes, which is why, in Eastern religions, you have reincarnation, because then you have another chance to try, and you keep trying and keep trying and trying, and with karma and with dharma, you might eventually get there eventually. Maybe it's possible that Buddha got there, who knows? It's because you don't know, you have no assurance, whereas in Christianity, we have, and in Islam is actually very similar to, it's very similar to Judaism, and it's also very similar to legalistic Christianity. It's a beautiful set of good laws and good rules and traditions that bring you close to God, but you still don't know. You have no assurance. Whereas with Jesus, with Jesus, there is this resolution, and that's the promise, which is cool, because in Islam, even they talk about Jesus. I don't know if you saw the verse that I posted last week, because you were pointing out that it was, what holiday was it? Ramadan. Oh, yeah. The end of Ramadan.
Yeah, I can't say it.
Gosh, I don't know that one.
There's the big festival for Islamic
people. Yes, but I posted the Quran. The Quran tells you to read the story of Jesus, which is interesting, because then if you can like leverage that and be like, well, your own holy book says to read about the life of Jesus. So it's, it's what we view as a Bible verse, but it's in the language, the Arabic language that is pointed to. And so it's kind of cool, because there's like, a lot of pathways and connections, like Hindus and Buddhists. They also, pretty much every world religion believes in Jesus, and as in believes that he existed. Historically, we have a lot of proof that Jesus existed. When it comes to as much as you can prove people existed in history, there's actually a lot more, compared to and even with the Bible, there's so many more copies of it and things like that would say, yeah, this is a historically real document. And because Jesus is mentioned in other historical things of the time, yeah, we know he exists. And these religions view him usually as a prophet or as a god, but they just don't believe in him as the only path. Mm-hmm. And so, which is understandable, because that's not what they grew up hearing. However, when we're talking about okay, so what is the good news that we're bringing to people? Why do we even need to bother bringing the gospel? Because that's what the gospel is the gospel means good news. And I like the story. Of, who is it? Apollos? Apollos, and you can find it in Acts, but he is essentially, he's preaching about, John the Baptist's message of, like, repent and believe, and it's really, no, not repent and believe. Well, that was what they said Jesus' message was, and that's in. But repent and, prepare the way of salvation, or the Lord. Okay, so you have John the Baptist, and he's preaching this, which is really Judaism. So he's going around preaching Judaism, and he goes to the church, to a group of Christians, or new believers, and he's like preaching this gospel, and then you got Priscilla and her, who pulls him aside, and she brings him to her husband also, and they're like together, and they're like, hey, let's have a conversation about this. You're missing this really big aspect of the good news. Let us tell you about this aspect of the good news, which is Jesus, which is grace, which is that we have a path we actually have a path to shalom. And I mean, we're going to keep, you can repent as much as you want, but you're not actually going to get to that path until you move towards this. And what was crazy is that throughout the Bible, you have these people that are counted as righteous or good. They're like forgiven, even though they have no understanding of the Messiah or Jesus. They have no clue who he is. All they know is they're like, there's got to be something better than these legalistic laws, and so like David is said to count as being righteous. Abraham is considered to be counted as righteous, not because of the fact of what they did, but because they believed in a promise that they had absolutely no clarity on whatsoever. Like, they had almost nothing except for God's got to do something because these laws aren't enough. Like, that was it. And I feel like sometimes I find myself in that space too, of like, okay, God, I believe in you. You got to do something, because sometimes I'm not sure this is all enough. Like, I'm not sure it's enough for all the people of the world who are never even going to get a chance to hear the gospel. You got to do something, so my belief is still, so sometimes I relate to Abraham, and and David and some of the other prophets who were like, wait, these laws, these things, these rules aren't enough. And in Romans, it talks a lot about the whole purpose of those, was to get us to realize how much we needed some intervention and intervention, and that is the hope of the gospel. And I like how, like, Priscilla and Aquila, they weren't like even condemning Apollos. It was like he had most of the truth. And I think that sometimes if we approach people like that, like, you're not preaching the gospel, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, and instead being like, oh, you're almost there, but let me tell you about this little bit more that we have, and this little bit more is that there is some intervention that you haven't heard about yet, and this intervention is through Jesus, and it looks different in each culture, like in each culture, talking about Jesus and his hope and what the intervention is looks different, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. And this is an idea that's called the 3D gospel.
Wrong pen.
Oh, yeah. This one's not very good. So this one is called the 3D gospel, and it's in a, that first idea came through some book, and I don't remember the name of it, but you can look it up. Okay, so that's great. Okay, so this is talking about how in a lot of worldviews, there are really, you have to bring the gospel to people in different ways because of their worldview, which we've kind of already talked about a little bit. Like people have different belief systems, and they're going to understand things differently. So like the other day I was reading the story of how, like, when how we looked at that Bible translation in Hawaiian Pidgin the other day. So I was reading about this Bible translation in Botswana, and I don't know which language it was in Botswana, but essentially whoever translated the Bible there for like demons, they used the word for ancestors. And so the people were super confused because they were always casting out ancestors, and they're like, but we value our ancestors. Like, what do you mean you're casting them out? And so sometimes there's a little bit of trickiness when you're going into other cultures, and that's just an example. And that's not even including the other things that we do. And the other things that we are known for that cultures absolutely hate now is that we brought our beliefs, our Western culture, and we mixed it with the gospel, and that is often what was brought to other countries. And this is a big problem because the gospel is not Western culture. And even like with the story of Apollos and Priscilla, she wasn't trying to change his culture. I mean, I guess they were both, I don't know. She might have been, I don't know if she was Hebrew or if she was Greek.
I think she was Greek.
I think she was too.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I was going to say they do sound. But either which way, and then that other example that we talked about in Acts, where Jesus was doing, not Jesus, where Paul was doing the same thing, where he was talking to the Greeks in the Parthenon and was like, "Hey, this is your unknown God." So he brought the gospel into their context, and this is one of the things. And not only this, but Christians are also known for colonialism. And we are currently very hated for that because a lot of the people who were supposed to be bringing Christianity, or that's why they were claiming that they were bringing it, actually were just colonialists, and they wanted, to use the land and use the resources and take over. And so you might have had like a few, like even if you think about where we live today, like we live in California. California was taken over by the Spaniards. They were taken over, quote unquote, for missions work and they started missions, where the priests, for all I know, maybe they really, really did value the gospel and they really thought they were bringing hope. But the problem wasn't that. The problem was that they forced Native Americans to live in their missions and to do this work, and they forced their own culture on them. And that's really the problem. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out and separate Western culture from, we're trying to get rid of our Western culture and just bring the gospel, which is the intervention of God. Do you guys have any thoughts or questions before I keep going? I'll take that as a no. No? Okay. All right. So we're trying to figure that out. Like, what if we remove our Western culture, what it still remains of the gospel? And this is one of the many tools that people have to help us think through this. So in Western culture, what are things that we value?
Individualism.
Yeah. So we value individualism. We value a distinct right and wrong. What happens when you do something that is not right?
Punishment.
You get punished. So this is the way Westerners think. We think if you don't do what is right or wrong, you get a punishment. So Western culture is very focused on, when it comes to finding resolution, we are very focused on guilt. We want a resolution for our guilt. And you can hear that in almost every like message of the gospel or altar call, or anytime somebody's preaching, you hear this quite frequently. It is this idea of like, well, when you're talking about repenting of your sins, you're talking about washing away your guilt, and it's a very very clear-cut process. It's like a formula where you're like, okay, well, if you do this, then your guilt is relieved. Just like if you go to, jail, your penalty is served. If you do your whatever it is, this idea is very much intertwined into our culture. In another culture, it is like this culture is another one, and this is a fear-based culture. And a fear-based culture, actually, I should probably write that because I didn't do that in the right color. So a fear-based culture, their things are usually because of they usually believe in spirits and what they're doing, and to appease the spirits, there's often sacrifices. There's often like what we would call superstitions. I am spelling that wrong, and just ways that you're trying to control the chaos. And in American culture, we try to control the chaos of things by being like, okay, you're right or you're wrong, and you're going to get a punishment, right? And so in a fear-based culture, you have spirits that you're trying to appease. That's the chaos that you're trying to control. So you try to control them by living out your superstitions or your sacrifices, or doing different things like this. So you see this a lot in a lot of like ancient cultures that don't really exist anymore, like the Aztecs or. Lots of most tribal cultures are like this. So this is still seen in a lot of like Latin America countries. You will see. I
was gonna say something like voodoo.
Voodoo. That would be like Haiti. Voodoo. I can't spell voodoo. So like these types of things are still ingrained. A lot of these countries, these areas where these were prevalent, they were kind of prevalent all throughout the world, let's be honest. This was very normal. And, even the culture surrounding the Hebrew cultures, this is how they worshiped their idols, and they would do sacrifices to please them. Judaism kind of even starts out like that before it like makes a drastic shift that's like, this is how we used to do things, and you see that with Abraham, who was going to sacrifice his son Isaac, and was like, well, we're not going to do that. They're like, but we're going to still sacrifice animals. And then they're like, actually, we're not going to do that anymore either, because God was saying, this is not the path, but a lot of these countries were actually, going back to colonialism, most of these were colonized. And so then they got a dose of Western culture that said, hey, you don't actually need these things. But still, you tend to have a lot of people that kind of like, so you have like what the word for it is called syncretism. I don't know how to spell that, but that's the word for it. It's where you mix one worldview with another. And so a lot of like Latin American cultures, they have a lot of Catholicism, but it's mixed with a little bit of, like previous tribal religions. Like in the United States, Native Americans still tend to fall into categories that would kind of be a little bit more like this. When I went to Fiji, we had quite a few interesting experiences because most of the people were another colonized nation. Most of them kind of had a lot of Westernism, but there was always this element of like, well, what about the witch doctor and things like that. And while we were there, a witch doctor put a curse. It was really weird. There was one woman who was one of our team leaders. She actually was cursed. She ran away with a guy, which made absolutely no sense, but the curse that apparently he put on her was to fall in love with him. And something happened where like we were like praying and whatever, and the curse got broken and she came back, and it was really weird. I was younger, so I wasn't like one of the leaders in the group, so I was like, what the heck is happening? Like, this can't be real. She couldn't have just run, like, I kind of knew this person. This couldn't have happened, Or then we went to another island, and the same thing happened where there was a witch doctor on that island, and he didn't like what we were doing, and so he ended up he also put a curse on us, and so we ended up taking that day and praying and fasting, and then by the end of the day, weirdly, he came up to us and was like, no, I free you, and you're free to go. It was just strange, so like, I don't really understand a lot of this, but the point is that people are very, people who are in these cultures still experience a lot of fear this way. And so like, for example, in the United States, one of my neighbors, she was Vietnamese, and Abby disappeared. I think she was like, I don't know, she was like 4, and she didn't really disappear, but we couldn't find her like in our row of houses, and like, we're like, she's probably here somewhere. Where is she? I was a little bit worried, but not like terribly worried. And, but my neighbor was freaked out, and she was Vietnamese. Actually, she was originally Cambodian, and she kept saying stuff about the spirits and the spirits taking her, and I'm like, I don't think that's what's happening, but she was like trying to, and she would, they would refer back to different things like, well, if, in some of my other conversations, they're like, oh, you don't do that because that's against our that's, if you do that, then this will happen, or you can't use the number 13 because then this will happen, so there would, or if we do this, it has to be on this day of the month, because if we don't do it on this day of the month, then our marriage will not be blessed, or our daughter will not be blessed, or whatever it is. So when Abby disappeared, she was talking about spirit, she was going off, and we found Abby, like, she was underneath, I don't know, she was like playing in the backyard behind something and nobody could see her. All to say, she was like, the neighbor, when we found her, was like, oh, I'm so glad, because a big spirit took her and hit her, and like was completely convinced that this was some sort of spiritual thing. And I was like, this has nothing to do with something, like there's no like little demonic spirits that are doing this, but this is still a very real like belief system, especially like, in a lot of the cultures, in that case, those were cultures that are in like Eastern countries, like that, like the area that was taken over by communism, like Vietnam and China. There's a lot, even though most of their worldview is kind of like would be kind of like Marxist in the worldview, because that's kind of the way that you do things. You still have this element of traditions that get passed down to you with like, lucky dates and things like that. You guys tracking with me? Yes? Okay. All right. So last one, and then I'll tell you how the gospel moves into these. Okay. So the last one would be a shame-based culture. And shame-based cultures are actually probably the most prevalent cultures around the world. Shame-based cultures are very much, they are very much thinking in terms, your greatest value is your family and other people. It doesn't matter what you do, like that is right or wrong, and guilt. It's very much like honor-based, and you can't destroy the honor of your family. And interestingly, Hebrew culture was actually this way, which is why a lot of Bible passages don't necessarily translate to us the same way. But it's very important to understand that when you're talking with somebody from an honor-based culture, so like an honor-based culture would be lots of Islamic cultures. A lot of Asian cultures are very honor-based. And actually quite a few Latin cultures are very honor-based too. Like you do everything based off of what your family wants. And it's interesting because when I talk with people from honor-based cultures, I'm like, why would you do that? Why does it matter? They're like, well, my family. I'm like, who cares what your family thinks? Because that's the way Westerners talk to people in honor-based cultures, because we're individualistic. We're like, you need to make boundaries with your family. Maybe they do, but that's not their culture. Their culture is to honor their family, and that it goes first. So the cool thing is that when you speak of the gospel, you can relate to people from each of these cultures a lot better by talking about their greatest need for resolution. So in American culture, we talk, like I already said, we talk a lot about things like the forgiveness of sins and the removal of, like he paid the penalty for our sins. Like those type of words, they tend to mean a lot to us, because that's what makes us enough. That's what makes us have that resolution that we're wanting, right? And this, here's an example of it. So in John chapter 8, there's the story of Jesus with an adulterous woman. And so she did something that was wrong. And, she had an affair, and yes, it does bother me that the guy didn't get pulled out who was having an affair too. But she did something that, she felt guilt of, that she did wrong. And you have all these Pharisees who are going to throw something at her. And then Jesus says, okay, well, whoever has no guilt, you can throw the first stone. So he revealed that everybody else had guilt too. And then he forgave her. And so she had this forgiveness of sins, and this is the gospel that is very important, the good news, and how it translates best to a Western culture. You see this forgiveness of sins. Whereas to a shame culture, you have you have a different dynamic, in which case a good story for that is, I think it's in Luke 15, the story of the prodigal son. And this story is, and I'm not saying that these aren't all important to all of us, but I'm talking, if you're talking specifically to somebody with this shame culture, this is the story that is going to mean a lot more to them, because you're talking about like somebody who shamed their family, he stole the inheritance, he ran away, and he was even going to eat pig's food, which was extremely shameful in the culture that Jesus was telling that story to. And in response, you have the father who, like when we say that, we're like, oh, the father forgave him, because we're thinking like guilt, But in that story, really what you see happen is, it doesn't say, like the point of the story is he honored the son. Like he gave him the ring, he gave him the robe, he gave him the party. And so the resolution of the gospel and the shame culture is that God bestows honor to those who are unworthy of it, who betrayed the family, and even though the family was betrayed, he still can honor those people, and that is the good news for shame-based culture. Is that God still honors the people who brought shame, who bring shame and don't honor their family in the way. Which is interesting, because I've talked with quite a few people who, who, especially like Islamic cultures, who had to flee to the United States because they brought shame to their family because they became a Christian or something like that. And so for them, like the truth of the gospel in that is like, I left my family, but God still honors me. And then when they go, lots of times they'll, like, to my disbelief, sometimes they go back and then they want to bring that to their family. And I'm like, that's amazing that you want to bring that to your family, because they want to kill you, but the idea is such a huge part of honoring your family and moving out of shame. And then the last one is like, how do you resolve that fear? So, if we're using this, we could add in, guilt, and we can add in, and we can also add in the other one, shame. It's all the negative things that come up. Just so you know, this section is from Sky Jafani and his book With, and this is called, I already told you, 3D Gospel. Okay, so anyways, fear, so like with this, you have Jesus with all of his miracles, and those are the stories that speak most to these cultures that are fear-based, because you see God in control of spirits. And he actually has the ultimate say, in response to the things that are uncontrollable, these spiritual forces that you see, and you see Jesus, and he's like, oh, we're going to cast out that demon. And you see Jesus who's like, oh, I'm going to calm the water, even though we shouldn't have gone out in the storm. And you see Jesus who's responding with miracles, showing that he has power over these things that are unseen in the unseen world that people believe are there. And so that's how you can, you don't have to live in that superstition anymore, because Jesus can do a miracle that is more powerful. So the aspect of like the resolution that these cultures want are like this power of God, knowing that he is big enough to handle and bring you freedom from these bondages that you might have to these unseen things. So anyways, this idea is called the 3D gospel, and I think it's interesting because it kind of gives you a particular, we've talked a lot about cultures and religions already, but this is interesting specifically because it talks about cultures and religions in the context of what is the good news, what does good news look like to these cultures, because that looks different to each group of people. So any questions, any thoughts? Yeah, sure.